Hi, Steph.
Hey Patrick, how's it going?
Really well. How are you, ma'am?
I am doing great. Hopefully, everyone had a nice little coffee break here. I am so excited about this session, and we have some special guests here. At the top of the conference, Steve Simmons introduced that you guys would be here today with us. For our listeners that are tuned in, you guys probably know Patrick really well. He's on LinkedIn. He's our LinkedIn guru, and he's got a lot of really insightful things to share. He has invited a special guest, Gary Jackson from CGI, and I am going to hand it over to them for them to talk about the different impacts that AI will have on your business and the security of your business. So, Patrick, that being said, I'm going to hand it over to you, sir. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And before we get started, everyone, I do want to offer a proper introduction to Gary Jackson. You'll see his title listed as Director of IP Solutions, AI, and Blockchain with CGI. In reality, Gary is so much more than that. Gary is one of the I lean on for guidance and is very much a guru in all things emerging tech. So, Gary, thank you so much for making space for us today. And thank you so much for
Yeah,
being.
actually, to be honest, I'm excited. I love talking about this. I know that sometimes when you talk about security and compliance and those type of things, it can somewhat be a kind of a boring subject. But here we're talking about, the wild, wild west and bringing the wild, wild west under control.
Really.
That's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I was reading a report from Stanford, the Human AI Institute, earlier today. In 2023, a little over $25 billion were invested in AI and other AI or other machine learning technologies, which means that there's just a ton of funding out there right now. And for organizations like those in participation today, very little guidance, which is why
Correct.
leaders like you who can offer their opinion are so vitally important. And then, Gary, I think you have a little bit of a presentation to walk through with us today.
Yeah, we're going to keep it kind of informal too. I wanted to kind of walk through some of the things we need to be concerned of, but I also wanted to leave it up to you, Patrick, to kind of ask me questions, and I wanted to pose some
Thank
questions
you.
to you as well. So I do work for CGI. If you have never heard of CGI, we're based out of Canada. We actually are broken into two components where we actually have a commercial side and we have a federal side. Our federal side is based in Fairfax. It is an American subsidiary, only focused on the federal government and three-letter agencies. And then we have the commercial side, which is where I work. And the commercial side works around the world. Its headquarters is based in Montreal. And one of the things that we've been trying to do at CGI is also, take the sting out of AI. There's been so much hype. By the way,
Yes.
Patrick, just to let you know, I went and got gas at an AI gas station. I ate cereal that had AI cereal. Like, everybody's throwing AI on everything. It doesn't matter what it is. I got AI, and
Yes.
that's been crazy. And what I wanted to kind of go through is, as I'm sharing some of this, is how do you do responsible use of AI, especially as the topic is AI impacted the security of your business. Are you opening up Pandora's box for everything to just be destroyed because you're bringing in AI? And we're going to kind of talk about that as we go through this a little bit. So that's kind of the thing that we wanted to kind of go through, if that's okay.
Oh, absolutely. And just to say this before Gary kicks this off, responsible use as an organization will be something that will be much more than a catchphrase for you. It will be a market demand in the very, very near
Yes.
future. Some of the things that we're
Yeah.
seeing, particularly around the EU AI Act, some of the things that we're seeing with ISO 42001 as a certifiable standard, indicate that
Uh-huh.
organizations will necessarily have to step up their game as it relates to how they're thinking about, how they're governing, and then how they're deploying these new technologies.
Yeah. I think that one of the, as we get into this, I think one of the fallacies around this is, they always talk about ethical AI, responsible AI. I feel like they're kicking the can a little bit, saying, hey, it's AI's responsibility, it's not mine. When actually AI is driven by human ambition. And that's really kind of the paradox here as we're talking about, some of the things we're going to be talking about is that when you're trying to do responsible AI, it goes as, it's basically linked to your culture. How ambitious you want AI to be, and the other thing too is AI doesn't just magically happen. you have to have the data to feed it. Is your data ethical? Did we ever put that term to our data? Is there data responsible? And what's the humans that use it? And that's a huge part of this. So I kind of want to go into the paradox piece of, the challenges and the benefits. I also want to talk about, responsible use. What does that mean? How do we bridge it to culture from that perspective? And then I'll bring up a little bit of what we are doing at CGI. I know there's a lot of advisory services out there. Our goal is not to scold you. Don't do this. Shame, shame, shame. I feel like I'm doing Uncle Jesse from Dukes of Hazzard. But anyway, that's an old reference, by the way, Patrick. But as we're doing this, is how do you not scold, but be able to kind of allow AI to kind of assist, human AI hybrid type of model, help you kind of on your journey, what works. There is this way of doing a little bit of envisioning, experimenting, and then basically engineering. How does that path work? I'll talk a little about us. Of course, we got to do a little bit of self, discussion about ourselves as CGI, and then basically how do we partner? Some of the things that we've already done so far. So those are kind of the topics I kind of wanted to bring up, if that's okay.
Oh, absolutely, Gary. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I wanted to bring up, and this is a question I had for you, Patrick, is the paradox. It's really a 50-50 split. Some people are excited about AI. Some people are completely terrified of AI. And there's a lot of hype around it. What are you seeing in the market as you're, trying to, go down the regulation path? What are you seeing around this paradox?
And honestly, what we see right now is a lot of confusion, to be perfectly honest, Gary. I mean, to your point, in one camp, there's FUD, there's fear, uncertainty, and doubt. In another camp, there are organizations that really see an opportunity to be first movers as it relates to earning some sort of certification or attestation, assurance for their customers that they're doing the right things with AI. What I don't necessarily see, however, is organizations asking if AI is necessary to perform the tasks that they intend to employ AI to perform. For what it's worth, the hype train, the hype cycle is very real, which is why I think it's so critical that organizations are thinking about employing, and to your point, using AI in a very responsible way.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I see all of that too. I see a lot of people talking about what it can be, but not what it can be now. Everyone's talking about an extinction event for either humans or repetition, and there's nothing in the middle, right? All humans are going to die because of AI, or all repetitious tasks will die. Well, I need something in the middle here, and that's where we kind of wanted to focus on is what's the benefits and the challenges. We at CGI, we call it AI without fear or favor. The goal here is to take away the fear piece and also to make sure that there is no favoritism when we're using AI. And that actually stems from, talking about the data that you're bringing into it. How do you make sure you can unlock all this potential, but you make sure that the outcomes that you're getting are ethical? One of the things I'm very passionate about, I feel, is bringing in all different types of data sources. This is a great time as a company to reconsider what sources you're bringing into your system. I'm not saying just bring in anything, but the goal is that maybe there's been source systems you've always wanted to use to bring in different viewpoints. One of the things I always talk about, this is a Gary Jackson opinion, not CGI. I've always felt a lot of the AI development that happened over the years has always been driven by, old white man data. I mean, I'm part of that group. And because of that, not bringing in different diverse sources makes AI kind of go off in tangents very quickly. So how can you make sure that that doesn't happen? So it's an opportunity and not really a risk or a challenge. That's kind of where we wanted to go. The other thing that
really to the
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, Gary, I think this is a critical point to those listening. I think at this point we've all heard bias. We've all heard that AI can be biased, and we really have to validate that we're not creating biased outcomes. I think the immediate pushback to that in a lot of ways is, well, I'm writing algorithms. How can an algorithm be biased? And Gary, I think your point here is the algorithms themselves are not biased. The algorithms are a black box of different machinations that we do with our data, but the data that we're feeding those algorithms indicate decisions that we've made in the past which might
Yep.
very well be biased in some way, shape, or form. Okay.
And maybe they're biased not on purpose, but sometimes just because we don't know what we don't know, right? And I'm not trying to also give us a way out, but sometimes you don't know what you don't know. One of the things that I bring up too around AI is, there's a big need for IT modernization. Do you realize we're building AI now and everyone's talking about it, but all of our systems in some capacity are built on 20 to 30-year-old legacy systems. So if you have this hard-coded legacy system that's actually the root of all your source information, and then you're bringing it into this new system, is there just not a bias, but just a shortcut that it's bringing data in that might be causing issues for predictive behavior, forecasting, modeling, that type of thing. And that's where I kind of go into responsible use around this. I mean, there's AI incidents, and I put that in air quotes, basically, how do we prevent those AI incidents from happening? And you'll see with these statistics here too, that there's certain people, it's funny, these numbers split down the middle, 39% are confident that we can actually bring in AI ethically. Some with reservations, 33%, very low confidence, 27%. I actually think this is a very optimistic statistic, but the concern is there's nobody on one side or the other. It's all in the middle. And let's talk about the issues. There's three major issues when people bring up AI. First of all, the problem that you have is data privacy. So I always think of the data that AI eats is the old 1980s Pac-Man video game, Pac-Man pellets. It's just eating everything it can consume, and then basically creating a model based on that. So how do you protect that data? Because maybe it's copyrighted. Maybe it's data that's been brought from another system that could be a hallucination. But how do you protect that privacy? The other thing that I see too is cost. Basically, at the end of the month, I never know what my AI utility bill is going to be. Is it $5,000? Is it $10,000, $20,000? We're kind of chokehold by kind of a centralized AI system. I'm using an AI model from ChatGPT or Google Gemini or one of the other services, and I'm doing all my work in the cloud. So it's basically, I have to use this, what did they give me, and I have to use it in here. And I don't know what that cost is going to be. I mean, I can pay for my ChatGPT and my Google Gemini, but then I have to pay for that infrastructure cost to keep that going. And there's no fixed cost. I can't really adjust for that. And then the last thing, and then I wanted to kind of pose a question to you is basically AI makes things less human. I call it the psychology of zero. How many times have you called your bank and you just want to talk to somebody and you just keep hitting the 0, 0, 0 until a human being answers the phone? Yeah. So is AI automated everything to make it less human? I believe, especially from a CGI perspective, can we bring humans in the loop quicker? Can we basically say, we come in knowing we know the context so we can actually have a real dialogue with you immediately? I don't know if you're seeing that, Patrick. Are you seeing a lot of people complaining about AI is just making them more robots and less human? I mean, what's your take on that?
And really, truly, Gary, so I see a rule of three as well as it relates to concerns around AI. The kind of acronym that sticks in mind for me is PEB. So privacy, to your point, are we ensuring that the data that we're using is either anonymized or in other ways that is able to maintain privacy and anonymity, explainability in the algorithms, for decisions in particular. The ability to explain the algorithm that's used to come to an outcome, to come to that decision, is more and more pressing for the market. And then lastly, something that we've already discussed, bias. People want to know genuinely that they've been given a fair share or a fair opportunity in whatever process has been automated through the algorithms themselves. And so to your point with human in the loop, I think as a governance mechanism, human in the loop is a prime way to ensure that bias is not necessarily removed from the system, but at least that we have controls in place to minimize the amount of bias because of the training data that's been used. But by and large, Gary, those are the three things that I really see driving concerns for organizations that we serve today.
I do want to get to the next slide, but one thing that you brought up is humans in the loop. Everyone's like, if humans are in the loop, why are we doing AI in the first place? I kind of relate it to standing by a highway, right? So humans in the loop is kind of a traffic cop. You know, when you talked about that explainability, I want to be able to stop, you know, kill switch, rewind. I want that human in the loop for that kind of traffic cop capability. Because if you don't have any oversight around AA, you're basically watching traffic go by. I don't know if you've ever tried to cross a highway, like, you know, it is
in LA.
Yeah, exactly, in LA or anywhere. Or to bring up a 1980s video game reference, another one, Frogger, trying to get a frog across a highway. It's crazy, right? You can be flattened. And then there's the autonomous one where basically it's just cars in a tunnel. You're not even invited in to make a decision. So those are the reasons why we definitely want to speed things up. And then we also have an issue. Why do we need humans in the loop? One of the things everyone talks about is AI is going to take your job. Well, not really, because we are going to start having believe it or not, by 2037, we're going to have a huge population drop off. You know, unfortunately, my friends and family and my parents, the baby boomers are going to be kind of getting out of the job market. We need to start replacing them with repetitive, you know, some of this autonomous work, because we can't hire. I mean, we're already seeing it with Burger Kings and McDonald's. They can't hire enough people. In the corporate world and the technology world, it's going to get even worse as people start letting go of the wheel as they're getting out of the job market. So it's a really very precarious situation we're kind of driving in, right? So, and that brings up responsible use. The whole goal is to be able to figure out what is your tolerance level? What is it that you're okay with? You know, what is your experimentation that you want to do is? And that's something that you have to have a discussion at a corporate level. Define your principles, define your governance. Now, your goal is not just to slap hands. You know, your goal is not just to say, don't use it. Because remember when ChatGPT first came out, I think every company, except for maybe NVIDIA and some ChatGPT himself or OpenAI, they said, don't use it. We don't use it. And then they slowly started opening it up. But the goal here is find out what your culture needs. And you might have a lot of people like they're so petrified of using AI, they might just try to, I don't mean to be rude, but sabotage it. They just don't want to use it. So you need to be able to create that responsible use by having honest conversations. What are the things that people really hate to do on a day-to-day basis? Can we get those in a kind of a repeatable task, and then make people happy? They build trust, and then you can move on from there. Anything that you'd like to say about that, you know, that cultural fit?
Well, what I find so interesting here, Gary, as we think about real responsible use of AI, for organizations, it becomes imperative that they really recognize that the cultural boundaries open up to all stakeholders, not just their employees, but also those businesses that they serve. With ISO 42001, one of the new and interesting requirements to earn certification as you are building your AI management system is that every entity must create an AI impact assessment. And that impact assessment, not using the technical jargon of ISO, is essentially an assessment that organizations must do to understand how harms may be caused from misuse of the AI that they've deployed. And so again, we really have to think about the four walls of our organization essentially dissolving as we begin employing these tools to create value for others.
Yeah. I mean, I think I say it, just to summarize your statement and mine, it's actually at the bottom of the slide. Responsible use of AI is about establishing guardrails, not roadblocks.
That's it.
And this becomes it becomes a little bit more difficult because we don't have an established rule. It really is the wild, wild west right now. It really is, you know, the internet in 1996. Everybody's just doing whatever they want to, but the rules are coming. We're seeing it with what's happening in Europe. We're seeing it with state laws.
Yes.
Yeah, the states within the United States are really starting to create laws that I believe federal will start following. But the goal here is to create guardrails, not roadblocks for some of this.
Yes.
Which I think
that's
is key.
A perfect way to think about it. Agreed.
Yeah, and so one thing I also want to make sure is AI making you money? I know the responsible use of AI is, you know, ethical. You know, it's ethical. You have to be this. You know, it has to be a necessity. But is it creating a return on investment? Everyone's doing AI. I teach at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and I usually ask my students, are you making money from generative AI? Or any of you? Do you have friends? I had one student say, they had a friend that was making a Disney itinerary. So basically they can use ChatGPT to create, you buy a ticket to Disney and then they show you all the rides to ride in a certain amount of time, what times to go, so you get optimal, and they charge for that. I'm like, oh, that's a cool idea. But then the other people didn't really have a good money-making idea. So one of the things we really are trying to drive is, cool, be ethical, be responsible, don't create roadblocks, but what is it you really want to do to make money? Like, how can it generate you revenue? How is it going to help with the return on investment? Because if you're thinking about the infrastructure costs, right now, you can't get a really kind of a control of those infrastructure costs. How do you justify what you're trying to pay, and how do you get that back? And that's so important. I don't know, Patrick, have you heard of some really good other experimental use cases that they've had that's generated a lot of money for companies using AI?
Not specifically generating a lot of money, but generating a lot of efficiency. Actually, in our
Oh,
field,
that's great. Yeah.
Third-party compliance. We're saying, first of all, for the market, for the listeners, there's compliance, which is really conformance, essentially ensuring that things that are sampled meet a certain criteria. But then there's assurance. There's assuring that what's been collected, what an organization is doing, actually meets the intent. Aside from the details of lining up, essentially running statistical analysis, humans still need to step in and offer some level of assurance that the right things are being done at the right time. And so, Gary, in our space, we're seeing a lot of organizations, a lot of platforms use AI tools essentially to honor the compliance need for what's being done, effectively ensuring that samples include certain language if it's policies, certain settings if we're pulling things from AWS. All those things are prime for automation and prime for building in automated efficiencies. But to your point, and I guess to dovetail on part of the conversation from earlier, humans will always need to stay in this loop to offer real assurance that the right things are being done at the right time. I've heard you at one point talk about being fit for use. I think there's two different things here: fit for purpose and fit for use. Does it do what you need it to do, and does it do it when you need it to do it? I think we still have a little ways to go with some of the generative tools before we can say that they're both fit for purpose and fit for use. But my goodness, there are just really some interesting things going on in different fields today.
Right. Yeah. And by the way, it's funny. I just realized our time. I was like, man, I'm only on number 3. I gotta start speeding up a little bit. But yeah, we got so much to talk about. But I agree with everything. And one of the things that we're doing from CGI, and everyone's going down this path for advisory services, but our goal is to make sure that we distinguish between what's magic and education. So a lot of people think they can just throw AI and it just works. And some people just believe you can put AI on anything and it just becomes a hype machine and you got marketing for it. The goal here is not that. The first question is, and I alluded to it earlier, is can your culture take it? Are you ready? Is your data ready? I do a joke is, when you're talking about AI, everything starts with the data. What does GPUs got to do with it, right? So if you had a bad data warehouse before, AI is not going to fix that, initially. If you're having data just falling out onto the floor, you're not getting your forecast correctly, AI is not going to fix that initially. So you got to make sure. I think we've all heard it: bad data in, bad data out. But the goal here is we have this kind of responsible framework that we've set up. We want to look at, what is your governance, what's your operations, what are you looking at? We also want to make sure that it's risk and compliant. We're looking at state laws, as I brought up earlier. State laws are very, very, very important because they seem to be driving a lot of this adoption piece. And of course, Europe, we're looking at the AI law that's started from Europe, especially in the financial sector, financial services, manufacturing. What are the things that actually could put humans in jeopardy or make decisions that can impact a human that would need to be explained in a court of law? Remember that whatever you're creating in AI that could be fixed, if things all go to heck, can you explain how it made that decision, and from a risk and compliance perspective? And what we in the Knoxville office, we really are focusing on creating a center of excellence. What does that mean? What are the sandbox environments that we're going to use and really focus in on? Here's a great time to go niche, find a sector and go deep on it and be able to build something that is very specific to that industry, that vertical industry. But again, culture. None of this is going to work without your culture, fitting your culture, and then basically, yeah, and then getting past experimentation. Everyone's experimenting now. There's really nothing that's going full on production. There might be some stock things and some, financial systems that are playing around with AI, but it's still experimentation. So you want to create a roadmap to how do I get out of that experiment phase, and then assess it. Is it mature enough to, go autopilot? I don't see a lot of things are. There's still going to be humans in the loop for those stuff. So that's it. And remember, starts with humans in the loops, starts with data, and what the GPUs got to do with it kind of starts this assessment.
And Gary, what I love about that particular slide about your vision for really creating a robust and responsible AI system is that it lines up almost perfectly with ISO 42001, the international standard for creating an AI management system for good governance of responsible AI use. So absolutely, to see your thoughts on this.
It's funny, Patrick, you bring that up, because I remember my first ISO certification. I was working for Siemens back in the mid 90s, and we had to do this ISO, make sure that we were standardized and everyone was following the rules. And I remember having to read the documentation, and it was so difficult. What I've done actually is use our own tools, our CGI AI tools, and I've created a chatbot, an AI chatbot based on the ISO standards, so I can actually have a partner in crime. Basically, I have an R2D2 that knows everything around ISO and be able to come to me with, I can ask it questions. So it's funny, like if you look at this slide and you see this holistic AI blueprint, it does hit some of the things that ISO brings to it, right? The standards, but it can get overwhelming. There's a lot of stuff to learn from this. So I'm actually using AI to make my ISO standard consumable. I can make questions. Am I doing it right? Ask it, querying, prompt engineering. What do I need to do to be compliant around AI? And then I can still got the document. I still have the ISO document as a human. I can still put my eyes on it, read through it, and confirm it's not hallucination. But the goal is the devil literally is in the details. And sometimes having AI assist in that really makes things a little bit easier.
Beautiful use case, Gary. And I do think about organizations that do have a history of internal documentation, the ability to create similar chat bots to minimize the back and forth between teams. There are so many potentially valuable uses for the tools today. It really is just a matter of ensuring that you know what you want to create and then doing so in a responsible manner.
Yeah. And one thing to remember too, for everybody that's on this, is watching this, is remember, don't put your private IP out on ChatGPT or Google Gemini. You have to create a private environment for yourself that you can kind of a walled garden, if you will. And that's a great place to start with experimentation around AI. Create your own kind of walled garden sandbox around AI. Do not give it out to public. Make sure you don't do that, which is key. So one of the things that we also want to bring up as we're talking about this advisory services, we also want to look at that. We want to make sure that, yes, there's a lot of cloud services that are out there. There's a lot of APIs that you can use. I mean, Gary Jackson opinion here, I'm very big around open AI, which means basically open source AI and decentralized AI. I don't want to be at the mercy of using OpenAI, ChatGPT. When I say open AI, I meant open source AI. Let me make sure I make sure that's very clear. And decentralized AI, where I don't have to put everything into the cloud or use a hybrid cloud model where I have Google, AWS, and Azure telling me what I got to do with it. Be able to set up a system internally, use my own infrastructure. So these are kind of the conversations we have. Is do you want to use a centralized AI model where you're using these APIs with cloud, or do you want to create your own and have on-premise to be able to do things? So this responsible use and making this decision is so key to decide on what kind of culture that is AI going to bring to your company, and all the applications that you want to bring to this as well. So it gets very, very complicated, very, very quick, but that's the beauty of what CGI does. We'd love to be able to kind of walk you through and talk that. Now I feel like I'm doing a commercial there, but you know what I'm saying, Patrick.
And Gary, I do want to ask really quickly for listeners. So when you talk about decentralized AI, You're not talking about federated training, pulling in training data from disparate sources. You're talking about legitimately distributing compute.
Decentralized. Yep. Every
Okay,
laptop that we
interesting.
have, so if you look around if I show you around my office here, you'll see that I have tons of computers all sitting idle, ready that are just sitting idle or in sleep mode. What if I could bring all of these to life or bring them into a decentralized system where I'm not having to pay Google or AWS or Azure to run processes? Yeah, it's not GPUs, but we're actually going back to the whole grid computing concept that became very popular in 2006 up to 2010. But being able to create an infrastructure with the infrastructure you already have within your organization. So there's a lot of discussion. That's not for everybody, by the way. We have to define what is your culture, what are you looking forward to do. Remember, a lot of these models can be cloned, and you can create your own kind of variations thereof, which is very important.
But to say this for our listeners that do operate edge data centers, I think what we're seeing the trend back toward a focus on you for bringing to bear compute and processing power.
That's right. And you know what's funny with this slide? I like to show this one because it shows AI is not new. AI has been around since the 1960s. I think actually 1956, if you see the timeline there. It got big and blew up. I think this is, again, Gary Jackson's opinion is to say this. I believe that technology had kind of hit a snag, and the market, the economy was kind of in a doldrums. And all of a sudden, OpenAI launched their ChatGPT app for iPhone, and then everything exploded. AI hype went off the chain. Because technically, I was part of the group in 2018 to create the first magazine, Esquire Singapore, half written by robot, half written by human. That was in 2018, years before we just started getting all this hype. And we even won a Berlin Advertising Award because nobody could determine what was written by AI and what was written by human. So AI has been around. And what we found with that is that what's so important with this stuff is citing sources, building empathy. I feel like emotional intelligence, which people think I'm crazy with this, emotional intelligence or context or empathy with your AI is just as important as feeding it data. And how do you do those things? That's part of the advisory services. But there's another context here, as you see all of the things we've done from CGI's perspective since the 1990s doing AI work. The one that I want to highlight is this last one here at the bottom here, doing proof of concepts for code modernization. I'm actually on April the 25th, I'm starting a class at the University of Tennessee to teach students who are in their 20s to never have to learn legacy code. It kind of sucks because I grew up, I learned COBOL, Pascal, SAS. These all SAS, these old languages that have been around for a long time that have kind of propped up our modern systems that we have, but they need to be modernized. But these students don't want to learn those languages. So I'm teaching a class that you can use generative AI to be the new developers to go into these old legacy systems and revamp them, modernize them very quickly so they can be experts. And that's the context I see with generative AI that can bring value, can generate revenue. So I start that on the 25th. We had an overwhelming response. I think I have about 25 students, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's summer course. How many students want to go to college during the summer? So yeah, exactly. I was pretty excited. So IT modernization using generative AI. The joke I always make, and I'm trying not to make any offense to this, but COBOL never dies, but the people that support it do. And so what we're trying to make sure is that we can use this new talent, use new tools such as generative AI, and read through the code, figure out how it works, and maybe modernize it to another language. Or heck, let's go straight to C. Why are we doing all these languages that are programmed to C? Let's have generative AI write it to C so we can modernize quickly. So there's a lot of really cool ways as we're looking at the future of AI where it can go. This journey is very dependent on the clients themselves.
And Gary, to that point, I think on the previous slide, you had listed some industries and some possible use cases for generative AI.
That's right. Yeah. So some of them we have around health, manufacturing. I'm going to get to some of these. Some of our use cases of customers we've already worked with. So I'll be hitting these again as we get to the end.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
You got it. And now so the goal here is, and this is actually a quote, I only want to focus on the quote from our president. I know I'm being kind of biased here, but George Schindler says, "We believe that we're at the beginning of a new wave of innovation and that the business value of AI will be achieved with a combination of human expertise and ethical use of technology." That's really what we want to do from a CGI perspective. We want to take that sting out of the fear of AI, and we really want to promote, hey, how do we, R2-D2 never tried to become a Jedi, never tried to take Luke Skywalker's job. It knew its place and it was there to assist and help. Having that human assist AI is really where we want to go, and that's kind of where we want to kind of drive from a responsible use when we're doing our design around operations. And what we bring, I just want to kind of lay this out from a CGI perspective. We do have a responsible AI framework, very, very linked to the ISO standards that come out, which I think is great. This ISO framework, we call it our AI framework, is very key to everything that we do. We also want to build a blueprint with our customer. Where do they want to go? How do they want to lay this out? We also want to create some use cases. We also want to look at the data and build a language within that data to create a taxonomy. So as we're doing work alongside of you, we're not programming in a different way or creating a model in a way that doesn't fit your blueprint. And then there's a delivery life cycle. How do we get past an envisioning phase to experimentation to engineering and then beyond? And then we want to create a risk matrix. There's a new SLA in town, and it's called this AI risk matrix. What are the things that you want to make sure your KPIs and your SLAs? What is your tolerance level? And that is so important as we're creating this journey. I'm not sure if you're seeing others, Patrick, that are looking for kind of KPIs, SLAs around AI.
I am, Gary, and I did want to name drop a couple of standards, if I could, just for our listeners, for those that can take notes. With the risk AI framework that Gary mentions, to our listeners, there are a couple of standards today that are defensible and are worth investing time in. First is from NIST, the NIST AI Risk Management Framework.
Yep.
The second is directly from ISO. It's ISO 23894, which is a supplement in many ways to ISO 31000, the traditional enterprise risk management framework. But ISO 23894 centers around doing AI risk management in, again, a responsible way. Parallel to that, ISO has a standard 5338 that's all about AI lifecycle management. So for those of you that are new to this process, that are just looking for a structured way, not even to do things, but a structured way to think about things, I would highly encourage you to look at ISO 5338, ISO 23894, and then of course the NIST AI Risk Management Framework, which does have well-defined crosswalks to ISO 42001 for those that do intend at some point to certify us so that you can offer your customers some form of assurance.
It's funny, I love doing this with you, Patrick, because I started my career when I was a teenager working in radio, and every time you say, as we're talking to as we talk to our listeners, I keep thinking that we're in radio, it brings back memories. I know podcasts are taking over the world, but I remember when radio was king, and queen, so it works out. But you brought up some of the use cases around AI that we've worked on at CGI. We basically have built some of the clients that we've kind of dealt with that I think is very powerful, protecting patient identities and data, health data, building an ethical wall for a healthcare client that we have in Canada. We've also done some work around responsible AI foundations for the railway system that's also in Canada. Remember that CGI is based, as a commercial entity, is based out of Montreal. And if you ever wanted to, I always get asked from some people, what does CGI mean? Well, being that it's based in Montreal, it's a French word. But how I remember it is the abbreviation is Canada is great, eh? And that's what the CGI means. Anyway, bad joke. It's a dad joke. I'll get out. But the other thing is increasing ethical awareness with your Army or your police force, making sure there is no racial bias when you're doing computer vision. You know, there's a lot of startups that we work with. It's about the behaviors. It's not about profiling. And being able to see certain behaviors starting to occur, we know that a certain crime or a certain situation is about to happen, but that has no bearing on skin or you know, ethnicity or those type of things. So we've been working with that, and also just looking at guardrails as we make sure there is no false positives for cancer detection or brain hemorrhages and that type of thing with, you know, because there's nothing worse than using AI to be able to determine if something is wrong with your, you know, with your health, and then finding out that it was a false positive or hallucination or poisoning data set that kind of caused everything to go off course, which is key. And then, of course, the other one is we're doing a lot of work with space. You know, I'm very passionate about space. That's what brought me back from overseas. I lived overseas for a long amount of time. Being able to determine, you know, my focus is what we call space situational awareness, making sure that no debris is hitting the satellite. And in this case, we have some work that we're doing on with satellites, making sure that the AI eyes that we're building out for our ExoMars rover is basically being aligned. It's not doing false positives when it's trying to determine things on the surface of the planet, which I think is a very key, cool things. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Gary, you hit on something I think really important here for those that are developing AI in this, and that's context of your deployment. You know, at the beginning of the last slide, you talked about facial recognition, and it is kind of a prime use case to talk around. In some instances, facial recognition is super, super high risk. As you think about walking around the streets of London, cameras everywhere. We don't necessarily want AI identifying people and tracking people. That's a clear privacy violation. On the flip side, however, I think we all have phones today that allow us to log in without doing anything other than letting the phone recognize that our face is the one in front of it. So the same technologies employed in very different ways absolutely impact how you need to think about responsibly using and deploying the tools themselves.
Agreed. And one of the things that we've been looking at, we've looked at some technologies that use your heartbeat for authentication. So your face isn't recognized. Actually, I'll be honest. When I did create work with, we created this technology called AI Writer, AI-writer.com, when we did the Esquire Singapore magazine, which was in April 2019 issue. And actually, I used my AI Writer to write how can humans avoid computer vision for facial detection. So I wrote an article. It's on my LinkedIn. I can always share my LinkedIn later. But that article was half written. I wrote with my AI Writer together as a collaborative effort. How can you get around it where you can't be recognized? Why was that important? Why was I trying to do that? At that time, when I was writing that article, there was so much chaos going on. There was, you know, the COVID pandemic. There was demonstrations on the, you know, Black Lives Matter. And there was a lot of people, a lot of my students were being targeted because they were protesting. And I lived in Hong Kong for 15 years. And actually, I left in Hong Kong in 2017. Yeah, that 2017. And a lot of those democracy movements were completely targeted by this technology. So I wrote this article alongside my AI Writer to help my democracy friends get around being detected by the Chinese government when they were protesting. Some used it, some did not. But anyway, it was just really fascinating. It's based on your context. AI is your friend and it can help you, but it also can be that paradox. It can also be your enemy, right? Based on the context.
Gary, just a quick time check. We're coming up on about 6 minutes. Just wanted to say that out.
You got it. This is actually my last slide before we kind of wrap up, and then we start taking some questions and stuff. Yeah. So the whole goal here is the sky is the limit. We do want you to envision an idea of you know, human-assisted intelligence using AI. We do want to set your vision, but be honest about it. You know, make sure that it's cultural fit. Make sure you're mature enough from a data perspective. Make sure you are also getting ready to be compliant, following some of these frameworks. And if you don't know how to follow all of these frameworks, not a problem. The goal here, what you want to really do is you basically want to make sure you can use AI to assist you in making sure you're following those frameworks. And then explore, experiment. Make sure that everything you experiment with is ROI led. Make sure there is a return on investment that is so key to this. If it's not making money, why do it? If it's not making efficiency, why do it? And then engineer. Everyone, and by the way, too, here's a great time to bring in new students. I know I'm advocating for new students because I teach, but for the first time, I feel like digital natives, these students just get it. They may not have 10 years of experience or 20 years of experience, but I feel like in some cases, our experience might be a detriment when we're trying to implement AI, because you need to be able to take chances. As long as you have this framework set in place, they can build some experiments and it can engineer out. So go talk to your universities and start doing collaborations with them. And then last, expand. Once you find a success formula that is working for you, expand and scale out on that. That is so important. And that's kind of what we focus on from a CGI for responsible AI in our life cycle, our delivery life cycle that we have. And the other thing is we're looking to partner. So if anybody's wanting to partner around any ideas, feel free to reach out to us. This is that commercial aspect of me asking for people. If you're interested, just go to cgi.com or look for Gary Jackson. I would love to be able to kind of get you in here to talk about being an advisor, industry knowledge. Let's do some experimentation around AI together. And if you're looking for students, I got some amazing students from all over the world: NYU, ETSU, University of Tennessee, Knoxville, Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. We're working with all of those, and there's some amazing students coming up. And the last thing I want to lead you with, and then we'll kind of go into questions because we're about that 3-minute mark. Together, we can build a world where we use AI responsibly today and in the future. So AI without fear or favor, that is really what we want to focus on from a CGI perspective. So that's kind of all I wanted to kind of go through this. Patrick, I did have a question for you before we start taking questions. One question. Just quickly before we start taking questions from the audience. Have you ever faced where you've created a framework or your ISO standard conflicted with a law that got passed? For example, the GDPR, the AI law, or state law. Have you started to see where you have to refine an ISO standard because?
We actually have not, Gary. I mean, that's been one of the really, really great things about particularly ISO 42001 is the team that came together through ISO IEC actually worked in concert with a similar group that was forming what has become the EU AI Act. So in many ways, those standards, one a regulation, one a standard, have really been created to support one another. ISO in and of itself, through the structure of the management systems, whether we're talking the ISMS and ISO 27001, the QMS and ISO 9001, the AI management system and ISO 42001, in the structure of the standards themselves, they're largely extensible enough to ensure that they don't paint organizations into a corner. But to your point, it is absolutely critical that organizations, that entities that are working across geographies. In the States, it's easy to see. In the EU, there's a little bit more coherence in some ways. But as you are working across geographies with different regulation, mapping those regulations to ensure that what you're building into your management systems is absolutely imperative. You do not want to be divided and create something that seems really good and really logical, only to find out that you're breaking the law in some way, shape, or form.
Without even intending to.
Without even intending to. And you know, with ISO 42001, and I'm sorry to keep coming back to it, but in AI, it is the bell that I want to be sure we ring. This is something the market needs to hear. I fully expect that market self-policing will really become the pressure that organizations face. And by that, I mean, just like today, we see SOC 2 as a standard, as table stakes in many ways in the States, for businesses to do business with other businesses. I fully expect organizations will need ISO 42001 certification for third-party, fourth-party vendor risk management before we get too far down the road. The AI Act should be written into the books in May, I guess, which gives organizations about 2 years, depending on the risk status of the AI they're deploying. The next 2 years are going to be difficult for a lot of companies. ISO 42001, however, offers organizations a structured way to approach ensuring that they are employing and deploying AI in a responsible way.
Yeah,
Guys, we're
well,
not
I
going to be
think
able to answer
we're out
questions.
of time. Yeah, I
We
think
follow
completely.
up with all the questions. We will
Yeah.
follow up with all the questions that we do have. Thanks for joining us in this session, Gary. Thanks for joining us. To those that have participated today, and please hang tight for our next session. We'll be on deck soon. Thank you.
Thank you.